Paris was warm that August night. The kind of warmth that lingers after sunset, thick and still. The kind that makes stone buildings hold their heat long into the darkness. It was Saturday, the 31st of August, 1997. In the Place de l'Alma tunnel, beneath the Seine, the air was cooler. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, the hum of traffic echoing in a space not meant for silence. At 12:23 in the morning, a black Mercedes S280 entered that tunnel at high speed. 4 people were inside. Within seconds, the car struck a concrete pillar. The sound of impact carried through the underpass, sharp and final. 3 of the 4 passengers would not survive the night. One of them was the most photographed woman in the world. Her name was Diana Frances Spencer. She was 36 years old. The question everyone asked in the hours and days that followed was simple. Why? Why was she in that car? Why was it moving so fast? Why were photographers chasing her through the streets of Paris after midnight? But beneath those questions lay another, larger one, rarely spoken aloud. How does a woman raised in privilege, married into the oldest monarchy in Europe, end up fleeing through a tunnel at 100 kilometers per hour, hunted by cameras she could never escape? The answer begins not in Paris, but in Norfolk, on an estate where nothing seemed urgent, and everything felt permanent. Park House sat on the edge of the Sandringham estate, a red brick country home with 10 bedrooms, a tennis court, and a swimming pool. It was leased from the Queen. Diana was born there on the 1st of July, 1961, the 3rd daughter of Viscount and Viscountess Althorpe. Her family was old money, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. They knew royalty personally. They attended the same events, shot on the same estates, married within the same circles. But old money does not mean easy money, and privilege does not guarantee warmth. Diana's childhood was marked by a rupture that she would carry for the rest of her life. In 1967, when she was 6 years old, her mother left. Frances Spencer had fallen in love with another man, Peter Shand Kidd, and she wanted a divorce. In the custody battle that followed, Diana's father won. The children stayed at Park House. Their mother moved to Scotland. Diana would later describe hearing the crunch of gravel under her mother's car tires as she drove away. She said she remembered standing at the window, watching the car disappear down the drive. She was 6. This was not a trauma that aristocratic families discussed openly. There were expectations. You maintained composure. You carried on. Diana learned early that feelings could be large and real and still have no place in the rooms where decisions were made. She was not an exceptional student. She struggled academically, failed her O-levels twice, and eventually attended a finishing school in Switzerland for 1 term before returning to London. But she was warm. People noticed that. She had a way of making eye contact, of listening, of leaning in when someone spoke. It was not a skill taught in finishing school. It was something else. By the time she was 18, she was working as a kindergarten assistant in Pimlico, living in a flat her parents bought for her in Colaherne Court. She babysat, she cleaned, she lived quietly. She was not yet famous, but she was known in certain circles. The Spencer name carried weight, and her older sister Sarah had briefly dated someone of interest. His name was Charles Philip Arthur George, Prince of Wales, heir to the British throne. He was 32 years old. He needed a wife. The criteria for such a wife were not romantic. She had to be young, ideally a virgin, from a respectable family, photogenic, Protestant, and willing. Charles had been pressured for years to settle down. His previous relationships had been deemed unsuitable. Camilla Parker Bowles, the woman he loved, was married to someone else. The establishment wanted someone fresh, someone controllable. Diana Spencer checked every box. They met properly in the summer of 1980 at a house party. Charles had recently suffered a personal loss. His great-uncle, Lord Mountbatten, had been assassinated by the IRA the year before. Diana expressed sympathy. She told him he looked sad. It was a small moment, but Charles remembered it. He invited her to Balmoral, the royal estate in Scotland. The courtship, such as it was, began. They saw each other fewer than 15 times before he proposed. Diana later said she thought she was in love. She was 19. The engagement was announced on the 24th of February, 1981. The press exploded. Diana's face appeared on every front page in Britain, then across Europe, then the world. She had been photographed before, but this was different. The cameras were no longer curious. They were ravenous. At first, she seemed to handle it well. She smiled, she waved, she wore the right clothes, said the right things, played the part. But behind the scenes, she was already unraveling. The pressure was immense. She was living in Buckingham Palace, isolated, with no friends, no family, and no training for what was expected of her. The palace staff were polite but distant. Charles was often absent. His relationship with Camilla had not ended. Diana found out weeks before the wedding. She discovered a bracelet Charles had commissioned for Camilla. Two intertwined C's. She confronted him. He did not deny it. Diana later said she wanted to call off the wedding. Her sisters told her it was too late. Her face was already on the tea towels. On the 29th of July, 1981, Lady Diana Spencer married the Prince of Wales in St. Paul's Cathedral. 750 million people watched on television. She wore a silk taffeta gown with a 25-foot train. She stumbled slightly over his name during the vows. The world called it charming. She was 20 years old. The first years of the marriage were a performance. Diana gave birth to Prince William on the 21st of June, 1982. 2 years later, Prince Harry was born. She had done her duty. The line of succession was secure. But the marriage itself was collapsing. Charles was cold, dismissive, and openly resuming his relationship with Camilla. Diana was bulimic, depressed, and desperate for affection she would not receive. The palace did not know how to manage her. She was too emotional, too public, too real. She cried in front of staff. She called journalists. She refused to disappear into the background the way royal wives were expected to. Worse, the public adored her. Wherever she went, the crowds cheered for her, not Charles. The cameras followed her, not him. It was humiliating for the heir to the throne. But Diana learned something crucial during those years. She learned that the cameras, which had tormented her, could also be wielded. She understood instinctively what the palace never would, that emotion, vulnerability, and directness were not weaknesses in the modern world. They were power. In 1987, she shook hands with an AIDS patient without gloves, on camera. It was a small gesture, but it shattered decades of stigma in a single moment. In 1997, she walked through a minefield in Angola to draw attention to landmines. She did not read from a script. She spoke plainly. She made eye contact. She touched people, and the cameras loved her for it. This was not the behavior of a traditional royal. Royals opened hospitals, cut ribbons, waved from balconies. They did not kneel in front of the sick, hold the hands of the dying, or speak openly about loneliness and mental health. Diana did all of that. She was turning the very system that trapped her into a tool for something else. But tools can cut both ways. By the early 1990s, the marriage was unsalvageable. Both Charles and Diana had taken lovers. The tabloids knew. The palace knew. In 1992, Andrew Morton published a biography of Diana based on secret interviews she had recorded. It detailed her bulimia, her suicide attempts, Charles's infidelity. The palace was furious. The public was transfixed. That same year, a transcript of a private phone call between Charles and Camilla was leaked to the press. It was intimate, explicit, and deeply embarrassing. Then, in 1993, a call between Diana and a close friend, James Gilby, surfaced. The tabloids called it Squidgygate. The monarchy was hemorrhaging credibility. In December 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced that Charles and Diana were separating. They would remain married for the time being, but they would live apart. Diana moved out of Kensington Palace briefly, then returned. She was isolated, paranoid, convinced the palace was monitoring her. She may have been right. In 1995, she gave an interview to the BBC program Panorama. It was watched by 23 million people in the UK alone. She spoke about her marriage, her bulimia, her self-harm, and Charles's infidelity. She said there were 3 people in the marriage, so it was a bit crowded. She questioned whether Charles was suited to be king, and she said she wanted to be a queen in people's hearts. The palace was blindsided. The queen was reportedly livid. Less than a month later, she wrote to both Charles and Diana, urging them to divorce. Negotiations began. The divorce was finalized on the 28th of August, 1996. Diana lost her title of Her Royal Highness, but retained the title Princess of Wales. She received a lump sum settlement of £17 million. She kept her apartment in Kensington Palace, but she lost her police protection. This was a decision that would matter. Diana was, by any measure, one of the most recognizable people on the planet. She was also estranged from the most powerful family in Britain, emotionally vulnerable, and increasingly isolated. Removing her security did not make her safer. It made her a target. She began dating. First, a heart surgeon named Hasnat Khan, whom she reportedly loved deeply. That relationship ended in the summer of 1997. Then, in July of that year, she was invited to the south of France by Mohammed Al-Fayed, the Egyptian billionaire who owned Harrods and the Ritz Hotel in Paris. She went with her sons. They stayed on his yacht. His son, Dodi, was there. Dodi Fayed was a film producer, charming, wealthy, and attentive. He and Diana began a relationship. It was not serious, not at first, but it was public. The tabloids were euphoric. The photographs were everywhere. Diana on a yacht, Diana in a swimsuit, Diana kissing Dodi. The palace said nothing. Privately, they were concerned. Dodi was Muslim. His father was controversial, desperate for legitimacy, and openly critical of the British establishment. If Diana married him, the narrative would shift in ways the palace could not control. But Diana was not planning a wedding. She was planning a vacation. On the 31st of August, 1997, Diana and Dodi returned to Paris after a brief trip to Sardinia. They had spent the day on the Mediterranean, then flew to Le Bourget Airport, arriving around 3:30 in the afternoon. They were driven to the Ritz Hotel, owned by Dodi's father. They stayed in the Imperial Suite. That evening, they went to dinner at a restaurant called Benoit. They were swarmed by photographers. They left early and returned to the Ritz. The plan was to go to Dodi's apartment near the Champs-Élysées. But by the time they were ready to leave, the paparazzi had gathered outside the hotel. There were dozens of them. Motorcycles, cameras, shouting. The Ritz security staff devised a plan. They would use a decoy car at the front entrance. Diana and Dodi would leave through the rear in a different vehicle. The driver was Henri Paul, the acting head of security at the Ritz. He had been off duty earlier that evening and had been drinking at the hotel bar. Toxicology reports later showed his blood alcohol level was more than 3 times the legal limit in France. He also had traces of prescription antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication in his system. No one in Diana's party knew this. At 12:20 in the morning, Diana, Dodi, Their bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, and Henry Paul got into a black Mercedes S280. The car left through the back of the hotel. Within seconds, the paparazzi realized what was happening. They followed. The Mercedes accelerated. Henry Paul was driving fast, too fast, weaving through traffic. The paparazzi kept pace on motorcycles. Cameras ready. The car entered the Place de l'Alma tunnel along the Seine. The speed limit was 50 kilometers per hour. The Mercedes was traveling at an estimated 105. At 12:23, Henry Paul lost control. The car swerved, clipped another vehicle, and slammed into the 13th pillar in the tunnel. The front of the car crumpled. Henry Paul and Dodi Fayed died instantly. Trevor Rees-Jones, the only person wearing a seatbelt, was critically injured but survived. Diana was alive. She was trapped in the wreckage, unconscious, with massive internal injuries. The first photographer arrived at the scene within seconds. Then another. Then more. Some took pictures. Some called for help. French law requires bystanders to assist at an accident, but the line between witness and predator was already blurred. An off-duty doctor, Frédéric Maillet, stopped his car and crawled into the wreckage. He found Diana barely breathing. He did not recognize her. He administered oxygen and stabilized her as best he could. The ambulance arrived at 12:32. It took over an hour to transport Diana to the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital, less than 4 miles away. The medics stopped twice to try to stabilize her. Her heart had been displaced by the impact. She was bleeding internally. At 4 o'clock in the morning, after 2 hours of surgery, Diana, Princess of Wales, was pronounced dead. The news reached London at dawn. The Queen was at Balmoral with Princes William and Harry, aged 15 and 12. The decision was made not to wake the boys immediately. Charles flew to Paris later that morning to accompany Diana's body back to Britain. The world woke to the headline, "Princess Diana Dead." The reaction was unprecedented. In the days that followed, over 1 million bouquets of flowers were left outside Kensington Palace. The gates became a shrine. People wept openly in the streets. Strangers embraced. The British stiff upper lip collapsed under the weight of collective grief. But alongside the grief was anger. Anger at the paparazzi who had chased her to her death. Anger at the palace, which had cast her out and stripped her of protection. Anger at a system that had consumed her and offered nothing in return. The funeral was held on the 6th of September at Westminster Abbey. 2.5 billion people watched worldwide. Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, gave a eulogy that was both tribute and indictment. He spoke of a girl given the name of an ancient goddess of hunting, but who, in the end, was the most hunted person of the modern age. He promised to protect William and Harry from the same forces that destroyed their mother. The investigation into the crash took years. The official French inquiry concluded in 1999 that Henry Paul was drunk, driving recklessly, and that the paparazzi had contributed to the unsafe conditions, but were not directly responsible for the crash. A British inquest in 2008 returned a verdict of unlawful killing, citing gross negligence by Henry Paul and the pursuing paparazzi. Conspiracy theories flourished. Some claimed the crash was orchestrated by British intelligence. Others said it was the palace, terrified of Diana marrying a Muslim and destabilizing the monarchy. There was no evidence for any of it. But the theories persisted because the reality felt incomplete. How could a princess die in a tunnel, fleeing cameras, and the only people responsible be a drunk driver and a pack of photographers? The answer is that no one person killed Diana. It was a system, a machinery built from fame, demand, consumption, and complicity. The tabloids wanted pictures. The public bought the papers. The photographers chased the shots. The palace wanted control. Diana wanted freedom, and none of it could coexist. She had spent 16 years navigating a world that demanded she be visible but not heard, adored but not autonomous, perfect but not real. She had learned to use that contradiction to weaponize her image for causes she believed in. But in the end, the system she tried to master devoured her. There is a memorial fountain in Hyde Park now, built in her honor. The water flows in a circle, unbroken, returning always to the same point. Visitors come to sit by it, to remember. But what they remember is complicated. A fairy tale that soured. A princess who was both victim and rebel. A woman who wanted to be loved and could not escape being watched. In the Place de l'Alma tunnel, above the spot where the crash occurred, there is a flame monument. It was built in 1989 as a symbol of Franco-American friendship, a replica of the flame held by the Statue of Liberty. But after Diana's death, it became something else. People leave flowers there. They leave notes, they leave photographs. The flame still burns. And underneath the street, in the tunnel where the lights never quite reach the corners, traffic continues. Cars pass through every day, unaware or indifferent, moving at exactly the speed they are allowed.